We're just going to go ahead and get into it. This week we're talking about the Bloody Benders of Kansas. Now, this was a family in Labette County, Kansas in the 1860s and early 1870s. The family consisted of John Sr., his wife Elvira, their son John Jr., and their daughter Kate. But now Kate was also believed to be John Jr.'s wife. So that's kind of where the discrepancies begin. And I looked at a bunch of different sources, and I don't think anybody actually knows what was going on with these people. So I've done my best to be as factual as possible. Now, the Benders owned a general store and a small property where travelers could eat and stay the night that they called the Benders Inn. So they would have, people that were traveling through the area headed out west would stop by and eat a meal, stay a night. And unfortunately, a lot of them didn't make it out west. Now, John Sr. and Elvira apparently were known to speak very little English. John Sr. was known to speak kind of, if he spoke English at all, it's kind of guttural. But he mostly spoke German. And Elvira apparently didn't really speak a lot at all. She kind of just grunted or, whatever. And she was so mean to the people in the community that they started calling her a she-devil, because she would whack people with brooms or spoons or whatever she had in hand if they made her mad. John Jr. and Kate, though, seemed to speak fluent English. John Jr. was said to have had a little bit of a German accent, but Kate apparently spoke perfect, unaccented English. And those two were kind of the standouts in the family. They kind of, were active in their community. Kate was known to be a psychic healer, and her, her gifts, I guess you could call them, drew a lot of people to Bender's Inn. But John Sr. and John Sr. and Elvira just were not very well liked in the community. And people considered John Jr. to be a little bit crazy, in pretty much every text that I read about these people. It said that the town considered him to be, quote unquote, a half-wit, because he would go around and he would just laugh for no reason, and he would, just be crazy, basically. Okay, so I've kind of told you a little bit about their time in Labette County. I'm going to get into the background of the family itself, the different family members. This is where it starts getting sticky, and this is where I had a lot of trouble figuring out what was going on. But I'm going to try to explain it as best as I can. There's actually no proof that the Benders are related. It seems that John Jr. and John Sr. were possibly German, but the women apparently are believed to have been born in the United States. So John Sr. was believed to be either from Germany or the Netherlands. I also heard possibly Sweden, I believe. Somewhere in that area is where John Sr. was believed to have been born. And they believe that he was born under the name John Flickinger. Now, Elvira, when I was looking at her background, is just ridiculous. Elvira was apparently born Elmira Hill in the Adirondack Mountains. She married several times, including Simon Mark and Stephen Griffith. So that would make her Elmira Hill Mark. And with Simon, she claimed to have had 12 children with him. Now, what's bad about Elvira, or Elmira, whichever you prefer, is that she's suspected of murdering multiple husbands. Of course, this was never proven, but it's highly suspected that she murdered a bunch of men she was married to. Now, Kate is believed to be Elvira's 5th daughter, whose birth name was Sarah Eliza Mark. And Kate, or Sarah, married a Davis, making her Sarah Eliza Davis. And that's kind of all we know about Kate. John Jr., there's a Bible found in the home of the Benders later on that had his birth name as John Gerhardt. And it's believed that he was married to Kate and not her brother. So, we don't really know much about any of them except Elvira. And her history is sketchy at best. So it's, like I said, it's complicated history. So we don't really know who these people are, to be 100% honest with you. So let's talk about what these people are known for, and that's being serial killers. So in May of 1871, a man named Jones was found in a creek in Labette County. His throat was slit and he had head trauma. They believe the head trauma to have been caused by a hammer. And then almost a year later, in February of 1872, 2 more men were found in a nearby creek in the same condition. By 1873, the list of the missing were long, and people just completely began ignoring and avoiding that area. Now, in the winter of 1872, George Longcore and his daughter, Mary Ann, she was 18 months old at the time, went missing. And this prompted Dr. William York, who is their neighbor and a friend, to go looking for them. Well, unfortunately, he too went missing. Now, up until this point, nobody really notable had gone missing. And when I say notable, I don't mean that they weren't important. I just mean that, unfortunately, politics played almost as much of a hand in past crimes as they do in current ones. But Dr. William York was a brother to Colonel Ed York and to a, I believe he was a senator maybe. So he was connected. So Colonel Ed York began looking for his brother, obviously. And he arrived at Bender's Inn on March 28, 1873. When he got there, the Benders claimed to have seen William, but they suggested that Indians had killed him. So, like, yeah, he was here, but, somebody else killed him. We don't know what happened. And it ended up, later that night, there was an argument between Ed and Elvira. And she kicked him out of the house. She threatened to hit him with a broom or a spoon or something, I don't remember. And so he left. But when he left, he was convinced that they had something to do with the disappearance of his brother. Now, a few weeks after this, a community meeting was held and searched Big Hill Creek and Drum Creek. So, 3 days after this meeting, a neighbor was driving cattle past the Bender property and noticed that the property was abandoned and the animals hadn't been cared for, so he reported it. But unfortunately, there had been a massive rainstorm that had occurred over a couple of days, and no one could get to the property for several days. But when they did get there, a large search party was with them. it was determined that the Benders had taken all of their possessions and fled. And what's even worse is a foul odor was traced to a secret compartment under the bed. And when they moved the bed and they got the crawl space opened, it was soaked with blood. So they're like, okay, something bad has happened here. So men got together and literally lifted the cabin out of the ground and moved it to look for bodies. But there were no bodies found, only large amounts of blood. So this prompted them to obviously start a ground search. And later that night, they found Dr. York's body in the vegetable garden. And before they closed shop for the night, they marked 9 more places where they believed graves may be. The next morning, 8 bodies were found. 7 of those bodies came from the places they had marked as possible grave sites the night before. 1 body was found in a well. They also found body parts, and they determined that most of the victims had been hit in the head with a blunt object and had their throats cut. But they did find a girl who was buried on the property who was determined to have been strangled or buried alive. And so there were some victims who escaped, and putting that together with what they found in the home, they determined that when guests would come, they would be seated over a trap door in front of a curtain that was in the home. The trap door would lead down to the cellar. The victim would be struck in the head from behind, and their throat would be slashed. They'd be dumped in the cellar and stripped of their possessions and then buried somewhere on the property. The guests that did survive backed this story up, but they also said that Kate just had an explosive temper, and said that and seeing John Jr. and John Sr. with a huge hammer was part of the reason that they left. And apparently a lot of them fought their way out because there were bullet holes inside the cabin. And mostly, it's believed that these people killed for thrill. They didn't kill for money. While some of their victims had money, a lot of them were kind of traveling penniless. So, it's believed that they just liked doing it because it was fun. Eventually, the Benders' wagon and their horses were found, but they've never conclusively found the Benders. In 1884, a man matching the description of John Sr. was arrested for murder. And the town where he was found, I believe, was in Montana or Idaho. They sent a request to Kansas for an ID, but when the man found out about this, he killed himself by severing his foot in an attempt to escape leg irons. And by the time that Kansas authorities got there, he was too decomposed to identify. Okay, so I'm gonna give you a list of the victims now. In May of 1871, there was Jones. In the winter of 1871, 2 John Does. In 1872, Ben Brown, W.F. McCrotty, Henry Mackenzie, Johnny Boyle, George Longcore, Mary Ann Longcore. In 1873, Dr. William York. Now, the dates were unknown for these next couple. Greery, Jane Doe, John Doe.